Now, the baboon here, who's supposed to be basically just a fool when the story was first written, he turned into what's essentially a shaman across time. So he represents the self from the Jungian perspective. Now, the self is everything you could be across time. So you imagine that there's you and there's the potential inside you, whatever that is, you know. And potential is an interesting idea because it represents something that isn't yet real, yet we act like it's real. Because people will say to you, you should live up to your potential. And that potential is partly what you could be if you interacted with the world in a manner that would gain you the most information. Right? Because you build yourself out of the information in the Piagetian sense. But it's deeper than that too, because we know that if you take yourself and you put yourself in a new environment, new genes turn on in your nervous system. They encode for new proteins. And so you're full of biological potential that won't be realized unless you move yourself around in the world into different challenging circumstances, and that'll turn on different circuits. So it's not merely that you're incorporating information from the outside world in the constructivist sense. It's that by exposing yourself to different environments, you put different physiological demands on yourself all the way down to the genetic level, and that manifests new elements of you. And so one of the things that happens to people, and this is a very common cultural notion, is that you should go on a pilgrimage at some point to somewhere central, and that would be, say, like the Rock in the Pride Rock in The Lion King, because you take yourself out of your dopey little village, and that's just the little bounded you that everyone knows and that isn't very expanded, and then you go somewhere dark and dangerous to the central place, and while you do that, you have adventures, and they toughen you and pull more out of you, like partly because you're becoming informed, which means information. It means you're becoming more organized at every level of analysis, but there's also more of you too. And so that's a very classic idea. And then in cathedrals in Europe, especially at Chartres, there's a big maze on the floor, a circular maze, which is a symbolic representation of the pilgrimage for people who couldn't do it. And so it's a huge circle divided into quadrants, which is a Jungian mandala. And you enter the maze at one point, and then you have to walk through the entire maze, north, east, west, and south, before you get to the center. And the center is symbolized by a flower that's carved in stone. It looks like this. It's big, this maze, eh? It's large, so that you can walk it. And that's a symbolic pilgrimage. It takes you to the center. That's the center of the cross, because it's in a cathedral, and that's the point of acceptance of voluntary suffering. That's what that means. And so you walk through, Jung called that a circumambulation. You go to all the quarters of the world to find yourself. And so, well, the self is the baboon in this particular, I think he's a mandrill actually, in this particular representation. And he lives in the tree. He lives in the tree of life. It's a baobab tree in this particular. So he's the spirit that inhabits the tree of life. And he's the eternal wise man. That's a way of thinking. So is the king, but he's sort of a superordinate king or an outside king in some sense. He's the repository of ancient wisdom, and the king is the manner in which that wisdom is currently being acted out in the world. And so they're friends, and that means that the king is a good king, because if the king was a bad king, he would be alienated from himself, and that would make him shallow and one-dimensional, and that would make him a bad ruler. No union with the traditions of the past. To be a good ruler, you have to rescue your father from the underworld and integrate that. And of course, that's a main theme in this entire movie. So, hey, a new mystery to solve. Okay, so the hero is born, and that's what the rising sun represents, and everybody goes, oh, isn't that cute? And the reason for that is because you're biologically wired, especially if you're agreeable, to respond with caretaking activity to cuteness. And cuteness is button nose, big eyes, small mouth, round head, symmetry, and helpless movements. And you'll respond to that across the entire class of mammalian creatures, even maybe down to lizards, you know. Isn't that cute? No, it's a lizard, but you know. So that's an archetype as well. That's the archetype of the vulnerable hero the vulnerable hero newly born. And that should invoke a desire mostly on the part of males to encourage, and mostly on the part of females to nurture. But males and females are quite cross-wired among human beings, and so there's encouragement from the women, and there's also nurturing from the men. And of course, those curves in some sense overlap. So there's more nurturing males and more encouraging females, but that's roughly the archetype. And so he looks cute and everybody goes, oh, and that's because the animators nailed that. They caught the essential features of cuteness. And he's also in the light, right? And so then the shaman, Mandrill, basically baptizes him. That's essentially what he's doing. And he uses something that's symbolic of the sun, which is this ripe fruit. And fruits are symbolic of the sun because, of course, they need the sun to ripen, and they're round like the sun. And so, and people know that they need light. And so anyways, the animators make a relationship between the fruit that the shaman is going to break and the sun. And so he's also being baptized into the sun. And that means that he's being baptized into the light, or that he's being transformed into a hero. And so then everyone's happy, and that's basically, the Divine Father and the Divine Mother and the Divine Son and the Self who's taking care of that. And there's a union between the baby and the wise old man, because the baby is all the potential that's realized in the self. And there's an old idea that the way to full maturity is to find what you lost as a child and regain it. It's a brilliant idea, and that echoes through myths all over the world. And that means you have to regain your capacity. Once you're disciplined and you know how to do something, you have to regain your capacity for play and sort of for wide-eyed wonder. And that's maybe the childlike part of your spirit. And the reintegration of that childlike part with the adult grown-up part revivifies the adult grown-up part and allows the child to manifest itself in a disciplined way in the world. And so that's all being hinted at there.